We also understand the need to keep the economy going, to keep providing for our families, and quite frankly, we know how to do that best.
We need our life back. We want to be able to work.
There's a lot of people that are hurting, not just people that are getting sick from this virus, but people that are, their entire livelihoods are being upended by this.
Many of those protesters saying in the virus, not the economy. Let's bring in Dan Bongino, Fox News contributor, former Secret Service agent, former NYPD officer, author, and he has a podcast. Good morning to you, Dan.
Good to see you. It's been a while.
Good to see you, too. I know. We've missed you. So we wanted to bring you in because some of these protests are going to take place in your state, down in Florida. There are 10 different states where these protests will take place today alone. What do you make of that? What side? Do you see both sides, or are you leaning in one direction?
Well, Ainsley, rarely has there been a topic I've been so passionate to get on the air and discuss than this. Of course I see both sides. I have a family and I have 2 children myself. I have a mother-in-law and 2 parents that are still alive that obviously I care deeply about. My mother herself is in an extremely high-risk category. If she were to contract this, it could be deadly. But Ainsley, I have to feed my kids, too. So does everybody around me. You know, and I watched that clip before the break of Nancy Pelosi seemingly confused about what protesters were doing. Well, let me enlighten you, Nancy, because you seem to be living in an insulated $25,000 freezer ice cream bubble, and you don't get it. Here it is, plain and simple. People have to feed their families. These are smart Americans who are intelligent. They understand there's a risk. They live with risk every day. If you need to understand that, Nancy, go talk to a construction worker on a construction site down the block that is living with multi-million-dollar equipment that could kill him in a minute. If you tell him or her on that site, you're going to need to wear a mask. There are precautions. We may have to wear some kind of hand protection, wash our hands often, and we may have to distance, but you'll be able to go to work and feed your kids. I promise you, the entrepreneurial, brave American citizens will figure it the hell out. Get out of your bubble. People have to feed their kids. That is what's going on right now.
And Dan, I'll talk to you afterwards, but just to give people an idea of what they might have missed is Nancy Pelosi's halting delivery in trying to explain what the protesters are up to.
Can you understand why they're doing that?
No, not really, because what we have to do is shelter in place. That is really the answer. Testing, tracing, treatment, shelter in place. And I do think that it's unfortunate. But, you know, people will do what they do. But the fact is we're all impatient. We all want out. But what they're doing is really unfortunate.
But what they're doing is not unfortunate. They're doing is exercising their rights. They could have been socially distant protesting. I get that. And there are places that are hot spots. But, Dan, if you do put in sprinklers for a living, in-ground sprinklers, and you say you can only do it during certain times, you got to wear a certain mask, let them do it. If somebody wants to build a house on the outside, distant from each other by design, let them do it. There's no need to be excessively punitive about this. Is that your point?
Yes, and Brian, whereas in the beginning, where we had a lockdown of our economy nationwide, basically, the American people are bright. They understood there was a lot of uncertainty in the beginning, the R naught, the contagiousness level of this disease, the lethality of it, how exactly it spread, were there, you know, was it fomites, droplets? In the beginning, we were getting a lot of misinformation. Everybody, I think, understood in the effort to save, you know, potentially at that point what they thought were millions of lives, the president made the right decision. But now, Brian, we have our grasp around the data. You don't need to be an epidemiologist to read simple figures about this. We have a better grasp of how it's. We don't know everything, and hopefully we'll figure more out, but we have a good grasp of it. It's only reasonable then to allow Americans to take the data you've given them and to say, here are the appropriate measures for you to go back to work and be able to feed your kids. And one more thing, Brian, Nancy Pelosi can't figure out what we're doing. These people, Gretchen Whitmer and others, it's not just Democrats either. It's for some Republican governors too. They work for us. That's not a slogan. That's not some campaign talking point. I'm not running for office. These people work for us. Get the hell out of our way. way. You're supposed to make our lives easier, not more difficult every day. Understanding there's a safety issue, we get it. They work for us. Stop talking at us like it's just like romper room. We're not children. We're adults. We've lived much harder lives than these people who are governing us. A joke the way they talk to people. I don't understand what they're doing. Well, figure it the hell out. That's your darn job, to understand what we're doing.
Well, you know, Dan, I think what we're learning is that a one-size-fits-all approach does not work all across the country, because where you're sitting in Stuart, Florida, it's a much different environment than about 100 miles south in Miami, which has been a hotspot. And when you look at the numbers, this particular illness impacts the people over 65 in a gigantic way. And going forward, we now know that until there is a vaccine, those people have got to be insulated. But had we heard from China earlier, maybe we would have had a better handle on this. We had Jay Johnson on with us a little while ago, about 40 minutes ago, and he said the numbers out of China in the beginning simply did not add up. Listen.
In a country 4 times the size of ours, I simply don't believe they've been topped out at 83,000 cases. I look at these numbers daily, and China has been at 81, 82, 83,000 for weeks in a country of 1.4 billion people. So I simply don't believe that number. China has to be dealt with one way or another. But I think we've got to stay focused on the lethal public health crisis right here at home right now.
So, Dan, how do you deal with China one way or the other?
Well, Steve, there's a difference in law and elsewhere between, misfeasance and malfeasance, right? Misfeasance, if someone falls on the sidewalk in front of you, you don't help them up. That's misfeasance, right? But if someone falls on the sidewalk in front of you and you punch them in the face as they go to get up, that's malfeasance, okay? That's what China did here. I think every country in the world would have understood if China had didn't have a good grasp of the situation themselves and put out some information that later turned out to be inaccurate. It happens all the time, especially in a crisis. But that's clearly not what happened here. China didn't put out a mistake. China put out deliberate misinformation to people that confused them and potentially led to hundreds of thousands of unnecessary lives being lost if they just would have put out the information appropriately from the start. And making it worse, Steve, they piled on in the end, engaged in an extensive identity politics-based, understanding our soft spot, the United States, identity politics, based propaganda effort using people in our media to cover up any potential criticism of China as xenophobic, which was totally nonsense. The truth tellers were the ones silenced by some, not all, but some in the media, which was really gross.
Okay, Dan, thank you so much for being with us.
Great to be back. It's really good to see you.
It's always good to see you, too.